So going back a bit to the sort of roots of you starting and Disrupt OT, what do you think was missing from the curriculum when you studied OT?
Yeah. So, you know, I I don't know if you know the term like third culture. So growing up, so my family immigrated from India to the US, and I was born here in the US. And so, you'd think that no big deal, but my parents maintained their Indian traditions and culture and kind of resisted fully assimilating to the American culture. And so growing up, it's I grew up actually with a lot of immigrants in my school, but I grew up with this kind of melting pot and then this American ideal. And then at home, I grew up actually, English was my third language. I wasn't allowed to speak English at home. And so for me, there were just a lot of things similar to what I mentioned about the Western context. So for me, it was just my own culture, my understanding of being Bengali, it just didn't actually, it didn't fit into what I was learning in school. So it was like, it was odd. I understand American culture because I was born and raised here, but American culture doesn't actually fit a lot of people's lifestyles and how they live their life. And one of the big things was independence was really pushed.
Mm.
Whereas I was raised, even though I was raised in the U.S., I was still raised with this idea of interdependence, of taking care of your family members and helping your family members, and just my role within the family was never an individual. But that it's still something that I struggle with. I'm in my 40s, and I still struggle with that idea of being an individual, not connected to anybody else. And so a lot of things just really didn't make sense to me. And then as we started learning like these models and frames of references, um, those really didn't make sense because it felt like you were trying to put a person into a box, and all of these were supposed to fit neatly, and none of them did. So sometimes like it just felt to me that none of this actually applies to me personally. So I don't see how it would apply to my family members, or other people in the community, that I guess maybe weren't standardized for these assessments or for building all of these tools. So I would say mostly just the cultural considerations for like everybody else is what was missing.
And do you think it's possible to have OT models and frames of reference for more of a community-based culture?
I personally don't understand why we push for a universal.
Mhm.
I think the idea of things being unclear, and maybe being a little messy is scary. But I I just don't tend to gravitate towards, oh, a model or a one way of something that suits everybody. For me, in my practice, it's meeting people where they're at, and then going from there, right? Doing it together. I don't know if there's probably somebody probably wrote up a model for that, and I haven't read it. But you can't have a prescription for everything, right? Like, yes, we do have prescriptions for medications and exercises, but it doesn't work for 100% of the people. And so, what about everybody else is kind of where my thought process lives. And so, I don't see how a model makes sense. I guess for some people, it helps kind of guide some of their steps,
Mhm.
but I would caution people to never be rigid because it's a disservice to the person you're working with, and probably use a clinician as well.
And it could take away getting to know that person and their situation
Yeah,
as a unique
yeah. If you're
unique
really
thing.
trying to force it, you might actually be missing what's right in front of you.
Mm, thank you. And in June this year, you held a Disrupt OT online
Mm.
conference. So tell us how that went.
Yeah, so it was actually, I believe it was in March. I'm trying to think of if I did anything last month, with DisruptOT. We do have a healing circle coming up actually this weekend. But I believe it was in March we did another virtual, we called it an unconference, just to really kind of push against the idea of this is a place only for experts. We wanted this to be a place for everybody. And so our themes were humanity, healing, resistance, and community. And I would say, again, our very first event was in 2021. Obviously, it took, time and community building to get to that point. But this event really felt like a culmination of all the work that we had done. I mentioned I think we've done over 20 events so far. So of all the things that we've learned from our community, whether speakers, volunteers, attendees giving us feedback, and just the reality of the world today, right? We are living through multiple genocides. And, for us, our governments are funding these, right? Like our tax dollars are actually going to fund the killing of children. And so it was really important to figure out, like, how do we come together? What do we do when we can't ignore all of this stuff is happening? There's just, like, we're way too connected in this world today to pretend like it's not happening. We can pretend, but we're lying to ourselves. We're lying to everybody else. And so it was really important to feature people that can talk about what's going on, but from their perspective of how they have resisted these painful, oppressive, really like deadly situations, how they've leaned on community, how they have tapped into their humanity, how they have been working on their healing while still living through these horrible events, right? They're not over. So I mentioned we had artists, activists, healers. Of course, we had occupational therapists, which, some of us do consider ourselves healers, but not necessarily people that have like this specific degree and a specific credential or anything like that. And so it was really important to have speakers from different parts of the world. So, we had an artist, Patrick from Congo. We had Sari, a photographer from Sudan. We had Joe, a Palestinian occupational therapist, and Ramona, who is also an occupational therapist in Haiti, also known with my terrible accent as Haiti. And she was trapped in Haiti at the time, right? She had gone home. She's in Canada doing her research. She had gone home, and I think I misspoke. She's in Canada getting her master's degree, and she's going to be coming back home. And so she was back home to do research when the latest I don't even know what to call it happened. We use these like gentle terms to make palatable what's really happening, but the airports were shut down. She had no way of getting out of the country. And then we had Isla, who's a Maori occupational therapist from Aotearoa. So she is living through colonization present day. And so it was just, and we had lots of other speakers, but just people who can speak to the work that they're doing and how they're healing and how they're resisting in really beautiful ways, and what we can learn from it. We actually had Lonko Juanita, who is an elder and a healer, and so she opened it up with just this beautiful like healing session for us all to come together. And so it ended up being really long. We had it set up for whatever hours we had set up with breaks. And we didn't want to put limitations. We wanted people to be able to take their time and share what was important to them. And so I think we went over like 2 hours or something like that, but everybody stayed. It was really it was beautiful. It was emotional. I mentioned that we pay our speakers. It's really important. As the people that I mentioned, if you can think about we don't want to tokenize them. We don't want to exploit them, especially considering we don't really have too much access to this information, especially in Western countries, and knowledge firsthand from people that are experiencing what's going on. And so it's really gross to expect that to be just freely given to us, right? And so it's really important for us to make sure we're fairly paying speakers. And so we let all the speakers know what the intention was to raise, right? It's not an organization, so I just have to do my best to raise money with the help from our community and our volunteers to get us there. And so we exceeded our funding goals. It was really beautiful. So, on our website, you can see the organizations that funded and sponsored some of our speakers. And it's just really amazing to see that people that weren't afraid to stand behind the work that we're doing, because people these days are afraid to be quote unquote political, but it's like being silent, being neutral is just as political. You're choosing a side, and it's the side of the oppressor, unfortunately. And so, it was just a really beautiful event for those that attended, those that spoke, and really meaningful, everybody that supported and however they were able to.
And you mentioned the importance of having an OT from Palestine in your book, Occupational Therapy Disruptors. And on social media, you regularly share the names and the photographs of healthcare workers who've died in Palestine, which is really, really powerful. What message and actions are you hoping to inspire in healthcare workers who see these?
Yeah, so it's been interesting. I This has been a daily exercise for me, of posting memorials for. We've had over 540 healthcare workers killed, Palestinian healthcare workers killed by the state of Israel, and two of those are occupational therapists. So I know that it's mostly OTs that are listening. So it was really important to make sure that it wasn't just a number, right? We keep seeing these death tolls and we start becoming numb to them. So yeah, part of it is just an exercise for me to maintain my humanity. I look up, each day I put these memorials together and I look for their stories, right? I would say most were killed between October, November, and December. And here we are in July, and I'm looking up these stories, and it's really important because it's there should have been enough time for somebody, a loved one, a friend, a family member of these healthcare workers to be able to share the story of their loved one who was killed. And so, unfortunately, we might find names because they're on the registry. It's even harder to find photos, and it's even harder to find a story of that person's life. And so what that means is they have no one left. That means that they were killed with all of their family members, anyone that could claim them and share their story. And so it's, to me, it helps keep me human. It gives me a way to learn their story, know about them. I memorize their faces, I memorize their names. And like for me, my process is I apologize as I go through it, right? My tax dollars are helping kill them, and when they were my colleagues. And so I'm hoping that by sharing this, it crosses that, kind of quote unquote political line, so people can see that these are humans, these are your colleagues, these are healthcare workers just like you, many who were on duty, trying to help care for the 90,000 people injured. And I'm hoping that people will see, hey, maybe I can actually do something. Maybe I can stop these atrocities, right? You know, at least 40,000 people are dead. Half of them are children. Almost every hospital has been bombed in Gaza. And so as healthcare workers, if we really do believe in our ethical obligations and, our values that are instilled upon us in the work that we do, I'm hoping that people will see, okay, there is a place for me to do something. My friend Tony from DisruptOT and I created a toolkit back in November. That's when I started making these memorials. And so I link that toolkit with every memorial to give people an opportunity to see what steps, like we've spelled it out. There's lots of things that people can do. There's at least one action anyone can do each day. And so the hope is that people will care. Sadly, that's kind of what my hope is, that people will care that, hey, this was a person, this could have been me. I want this to stop.
Do you think there's more of a role that our professional bodies could be doing in sort of raising awareness of this, having some empathy, you know, at least acknowledging that these are, like you said, these are our colleagues, these are the people with the same sort of drive and interest as us to work in healthcare and help people, and you know, we should feel connected to them.
Yeah, you know, I'll give the polite answer. Obviously, you know, there's a lot of frustration with it's been 10 months. And it's not like we haven't been, right? We've been writing and trying to contact our institutions, you know, our national associations, our even our local and regional hospitals for months. And you know, some of the things that I've heard, a lot of it is very kind of neutrally non-response. And there have been some people who have asked, like, what does this have to do with us? And, you know, I would think that we have a responsibility to protect our colleagues and help them with the work that they're doing. If you just think about occupational therapists that are in Gaza right now, they're starving. Many are still trying to volunteer despite constantly being displaced and, you know, their homes being bombed and their hospitals being bombed. But they need help with resources, right? Can we do fundraisers? That's something that these organizations can do. I mean, the least that they can do is like share what's happening, right? Share what the many international humanitarian organizations have been sharing since October, you know, or the United Nations. You know, if you're worried about being political, what about humanitarian organizations that are neutral, and the United Nations, which is neutral, to share any of that information or fundraise to help get things like food, or help get equipment, medical equipment. You know, there are a lot of individuals that are actually sending over. There is slowly medical equipment is getting through, rehab equipment is getting through, but this is not happening from a hospital. This is not happening from any kind of organization. These are all individuals that are coming together and making this happen. And so our institutions can help with that. More recently, children from Gaza are actually making it to the US and the UK, other European countries as well. There are children, I would say what I'm seeing now, the majority of these children have had limb amputations. And so they're coming in for treatment. They're getting fitted for prosthetics, and they're getting rehabilitation services. And so they're in our countries, they're in the US, they're on our soil, and they're going to be here for months, and they're being seen by occupational therapists, physical therapists, and other healthcare professionals. So they are receiving American and British and wherever you are, they are receiving services in your country from your clinicians. And so I don't see how we can say, hey, that still has nothing to do with us, right?
Yeah.
And again, organizations like Heal Palestine, they're in the US, and PRCF is just got approval to bring a bunch of children, and they're accompanied by, you know, usually at least one adult relative, if not both parents. So I think they are, can't remember if it's 15 countries, but there's a bunch of countries in the European Union that these children and their families are going to come to. And so what's happening, I've seen in the US, you know, I have been trying to help as well, is think of think of what these families have been through, right? And they still managed to survive, and they found a way to come here for treatment. So all of them have experienced trauma, right? They're still experiencing that trauma. And so they need mental health support. If you think of all the things that pediatric occupational therapists can offer these kids, or those of us that work with adults can offer the parents for support with their new temporary home and all of these changes and everything that they're going through. So volunteer occupational therapists, this is true, are helping these families here in the US. And so again, our associations, you have access, at least in the US, to over 100,000 occupational therapists. They could get some of that information out there to help these children and families who are in the US and UK getting treatment that need a lot of support. So, it very much falls into our professional responsibilities and our ethics and our scope of practice, but it's still being ignored. So there's lots of places they can insert themselves and do something that is considered neutral and apolitical in their eyes.
Thank you. And what's the future of DisruptOT? What's next?
Yeah, so definitely don't have a real plan. I would say DisruptOT isn't going anywhere. It takes a lot of my time. I'll say sometimes I do more volunteer work for DisruptOT than I do paid work, but it's worth it. And so, I have wanted to quit many times, but unfortunately, we're volunteer run, and we don't always have volunteers to support. And I've heard from too many people how important the work we're doing is. And so DisruptOT is going to be here to stay long after I retire from being an occupational therapist. And I would say the future is like whatever is needed. It's always been a priority to center the people that are most harmed. And, unfortunately, there's a lot of harm happening. And so whatever the community asks for, whoever our volunteers are, and what's important to them and what they have the capacity to do, I would say that's wherever we're going to be headed next. I personally hope that we have more community involvement. We started with occupational therapy professionals and students, and then we went beyond to include other health professionals, mostly allied health professionals. And then we started including more people from the community. And so my hope is that it goes obviously beyond OT, but really into the community, where people who receive healthcare and have no background in providing any healthcare services can really be part of DisruptOT and help guide where we go and what we do, and kind of where we shine our focuses on. So yeah, I would say that's like the big future. But for now, we are hoping to, we've always raised funds to pay our speakers, but we're hoping that we can leverage, the work that we do to try to raise funds for our colleagues, especially our colleagues that are in Gaza, that just, that are not able to eat every day, and not just for helping them provide rehab services. We need to make sure that they're alive and can get well in order to be able to do that work. So hoping that we can, we've been doing fundraisers privately, but we're hoping that more people will care so that we can try to do more bigger fundraisers just to help our colleagues survive.
Well, thanks, Sheela. It's been so interesting talking with you and hearing about DisruptOT.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate everything you're doing. It's cool to see and learn from the different people that you've interviewed. So I really appreciate this process and learning from you as well.
Thank you.